The white horse fell in the canyon just after dawn, blood streaking his pale coat, foam at his mouth. No brand marked him, but the rope burns on his legs told a story of cruelty. Tom Brennan found him there, trembling and broken, eyes rolling with terror. The old cowboy had seen plenty of suffering in his 63 years, but something about this horse stopped him cold. As he knelt beside the dying animal, he noticed strange markings carved into the horse's hooves, symbols he recognized from a crime that had haunted this valley for 20 years. Could this battered creature hold the key to a truth the whole town had tried to bury? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tom Brennan woke at 5:30, same as he had every morning for the past 40 years. The alarm never sounded anymore. His body knew the rhythm, understood the requirements of a life built on routine and discipline. He lay in the darkness for a moment, listening to the silence of the old ranch house, feeling the empty space beside him, where Sarah had slept for 37 years. 3 years gone now. Some mornings it felt like 3 decades, other mornings like 3 minutes. He rose without ceremony, dressed in worn jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better seasons, and made his way to the kitchen. The coffee pot was already programmed, another small mercy of modern life that he'd resisted until Sarah insisted. She'd been right about that, as she'd been right about most things. The house filled with the smell of brewing coffee, and Tom stood at the window watching the sun begin its slow climb over the Bitterroot Range. Ironwood Valley spread below his property like a patchwork quilt, sections of ranch land, stands of pine and aspen, the silver thread of Cottonwood Creek winding through it all. He'd been born in this valley 63 years ago, left it only once for a stint in the army, and returned to marry Sarah Henshaw when he was 22 and she was 20. They'd built this life together, board by board, fence post by fence post, season by season. The ranch wasn't large by Montana standards. 300 acres, mostly grazing land for the small herd of cattle he maintained more out of habit than profit. Sarah had kept horses, 2 mares and a gelding she'd trained herself. After she passed, Tom had sold them to a family in Missoula. He couldn't bear the sight of empty stalls, couldn't stand the accusing looks from animals that missed her as much as he did. Tom poured his coffee into a chipped mug that read, "World's Best Dad," a Father's Day gift from the daughter they'd never had. Sarah had bought it anyway, her sense of humor carrying them through the disappointment of childlessness. He'd kept it, used it every day, another small way of keeping her present. The kitchen was neat, organized with military precision. Tom had learned that discipline in the service. He'd been a sergeant, managed a logistics unit in Germany during a quiet period of the Cold War. Nothing glamorous, no combat stories to tell. Just the steady work of making sure supplies moved where they needed to go, that men had what they required to do their jobs. He'd been good at it, good enough to earn commendations and the respect of officers who saw leadership potential in the quiet Montana boy. The Bronze Star sat in his desk drawer in the study, wrapped in the original presentation case beneath a stack of Sarah's letters from when they were courting. He never looked at it, never displayed it. It represented a version of himself that belonged to the past, a younger man who believed organization and discipline could solve any problem. Life had taught him otherwise. Tom finished his coffee, rinsed the mug and set it in the dish rack. The sun was higher now, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. Time to check the cattle, mend the section of fence near the north pasture that had been sagging for a week, maybe drive into town for supplies. The shape of his days had become predictable, comforting in their sameness. He told himself he preferred it that way. The drive into Ironwood took 20 minutes on good roads. The town itself was small, maybe 800 souls if you counted the outlying ranches. Main Street held the essentials: Fletcher's General Store, Maria's Diner, the post office, First Valley Bank, and the sheriff's office, where Ray Clayton had worked for 30 years, the last 15 as sheriff. Tom parked his truck outside Maria's Diner, a ritual as fixed as his morning coffee. Inside, the breakfast crowd was thinning. A few ranchers lingering over eggs and hash browns. Old Pete Morrison reading the newspaper in his corner booth. 2 of the Hensley boys arguing about the Broncos' chances this season. Maria Santos looked up from behind the counter and smiled. She was 58, a widow herself, had been running this diner since her husband Carlos died in a logging accident 15 years back. She and Sarah had been close friends, and after Sarah's death, Maria had made it her personal mission to ensure Tom ate at least one proper meal a day. "Morning, Tom. Usual, please." He settled onto his regular stool, third from the left, with a clear view of the street. Maria poured coffee without asking, slid a newspaper across the counter. "You see, they're finally repaving Highway 12? Only took them 3 years of complaints. Progress moves slow in Montana, moves slow everywhere when the money's tight." She disappeared into the kitchen, returned a few minutes later with eggs over easy, bacon, wheat toast, and fried potatoes. Tom had long since stopped trying to pay full price. Maria charged him half and threatened to ban him if he argued. He ate slowly, listening to the low conversations around him. Small-town life meant everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. The Hensley boys were still debating football. Pete Morrison muttered something about interest rates. A couple of women Tom vaguely recognized discussed someone's granddaughter's wedding in Billings. The door opened, bringing a gust of cool morning air and Sheriff Ray Clayton. He was a big man, had played linebacker for the University of Montana 40 years ago, and still carried himself with an athlete's awareness. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished, his silver hair cut military short. He'd been Tom's friend since grade school, had stood as best man at Tom and Sarah's wedding. Tom. Ray nodded, took the stool beside him. "Maria, just coffee." "You not eating, Ray?" "Had breakfast at home. Diane's on a health kick. Greek yogurt and granola." He said it like a man describing prison food. Tom smiled. "Could be worse, could be better." Ray sipped his coffee, studied Tom with the careful attention of a man trained to notice details. "You doing all right out there? Haven't seen you much this week. Staying busy?" "Fixed the fence line, cleared some deadfall from the creek." "Good, that's good." Ray seemed to have something else on his mind, but he held it back, the way men of their generation often did. They could sit in comfortable silence, understanding that friendship didn't require constant conversation. Doc Harris came in next. A tall, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and hands that had delivered half the babies in Ironwood County over a 40-year career. He'd officially retired 5 years ago, but still kept his veterinary practice open 3 days a week. Small towns couldn't afford to lose their only vet, retired or not. "Gentlemen." Doc took the stool on Tom's other side. "Maria, you still make that apple pie? Made it fresh yesterday. For breakfast? I'm not your mother, Wayne. I'm not going to judge." Doc grinned. He was 71, a widower like Tom, though his wife had been gone much longer, nearly 20 years. He and Tom had formed a quiet bond, two men who understood the particular loneliness of losing the women who'd given shape to their lives. "Tom, you still have that old barn standing?" Doc asked. "I've got a client needs temporary shelter for a mare, just a few weeks while they rebuild their stable." "It's sound enough." "Haven't used it since Sarah's horses. I'll let them know. They'll pay boarding." Tom shrugged. Money wasn't the issue. The thought of a horse in that barn again created a small ache he couldn't quite name. But he said, "That's fine. Let me know when they're bringing her over." They talked about small things, the weather turning, the elk season starting next month, the new family that bought the Patterson place up valley, normal conversation, the kind that filled the spaces between silences that reminded men they were part of a community even when they lived alone on distant properties. Tom finished his breakfast, left cash on the counter with a generous tip that Maria would try to refuse later, and headed back out to his truck. The morning had fully arrived now, the valley bright with September sunshine. He had work waiting, the kind of simple physical labor that kept him connected to the land and to the life he'd built with Sarah. But as he drove back toward his ranch, something nagged at him. A feeling he couldn't quite identify, like the pressure drop before a storm. He told himself it was nothing, just the mind playing tricks, creating significance where none existed. The canyon road wound through stands of pine, climbed gradually toward his property. He knew every turn, every dip, every wide spot where you could pull off if another vehicle came the opposite direction. This was his territory, familiar as his own heartbeat. Then he saw it. Just off the road, maybe 30 yards down into the canyon, a flash of white against the brown and green of the landscape. Tom slowed, pulled over, killed the engine. He sat for a moment, staring, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A horse, a white horse, lying on its side in the dust and scrub grass. Tom got out of the truck, moved carefully down the slope. The terrain was rough, scattered with rocks and gnarled roots. As he got closer, his stomach tightened. The horse was in bad shape. Blood matted in its mane and along its flanks, foam at its mouth, its breathing rapid and shallow. No brand that he could see. No saddle, no halter. Just rope burns on its legs, deep and recent, and something else. Tom knelt beside the animal, felt its rapid pulse, saw the wild fear in its rolling eyes. He'd seen suffering before, in animals and men, but something about this horse stopped him cold. Its hooves. Someone had carved symbols into them, crude markings that looked like they'd been done with a knife or a sharp stone. Tom leaned closer, recognition hitting him like a physical blow. He'd seen these symbols before, 20 years ago at a crime scene. At Jacob Whitmore's ranch, the night the man was murdered and his horses stolen. Tom pulled out his phone, dialed Doc Harris. "Wayne, I need you. And bring your emergency kit. I'm on Canyon Road, half a mile from my turnoff. There's a horse here, and he's in trouble." He didn't mention the symbols. That conversation would come later, when the horse was stable and they could think clearly about what this meant. Tom stayed beside the animal, one hand on its neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath his palm. The horse tried to move, to stand, but couldn't manage it. Tom spoke softly, meaningless words of comfort, the kind Sarah used to use with her horses. "Easy now, easy, help's coming. Just hold on." The sun climbed higher. Tom waited. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a door he'd thought sealed shut began to crack open, letting in the light of old questions, old injustices, old wounds that had never properly healed. Doc Harris arrived within 20 minutes, his old pickup rattling down Canyon Road faster than was strictly safe. He carried his veterinary kit, the large one he reserved for emergencies, and moved down the slope with surprising agility for a man his age. "Lord have mercy," he breathed, kneeling beside the horse. His hands moved quickly, professionally, checking vital signs, examining wounds, assessing the situation with the practiced efficiency of 4 decades in practice. "How long has he been here?" "Don't know. I found him maybe 30 minutes ago. He's severely dehydrated. These wounds are infected. Rope burns on all 4 legs. Someone kept this animal tied for days, maybe weeks." Doc's voice carried an edge Tom rarely heard. Wayne Harris loved animals with a purity that bordered on spiritual. Cruelty to them offended him at a fundamental level. Tom watched as Doc prepared in 4 line, working with steady hands despite the horse's occasional thrashing. The animal was too weak to put up much resistance, which was its own kind of tragedy. "Can you save him?" "Maybe. We need to get him to my clinic. I'll need to sedate him for transport." Doc prepared a syringe, administered the injection with practiced care. "This is going to be touch and go, Tom. He's lost a lot of blood, and that infection is advanced. But he's young, maybe 4 or 5 years old. That works in his favor." While they waited for the sedation to take effect, Tom made the call he'd been dreading. "Ray, it's Tom. I need you out on Canyon Road, and you're going to want to see this." Sheriff Clayton arrived as they were loading the horse into Doc's modified trailer, one he'd designed years ago for transporting large animals in medical distress. Ray approached slowly, his expression shifting from concern to confusion to something harder to read. Tom waited until Doc had the horse secured, then gestured for Ray to follow him back to where the animal had lain. He pointed to the hooves. Ray's face went pale. He crouched down, stared at the markings in the dust where Tom had photographed them with his phone before they moved the horse. The symbols were crude but distinct, a circle bisected by 2 lines, with smaller marks radiating outward like sun rays. "Jesus Christ," Ray's voice was barely a whisper. "You see it too?" "Tom, don't. 20 years ago, Jacob Whitmore's barn, these same symbols were carved into the stall doors." Ray stood, his jaw tight. "That case is closed. It was never solved. That's not the same thing as closed. Let it alone." Ray's tone carried a warning, but also something else. Fear, maybe, or guilt. A man was murdered, 3 horses were stolen, and now one shows up 2 decades later, half dead, with the killer's signature carved into his hooves. Tom kept his voice level, but anger simmered beneath it. You can't expect me to ignore that. I expect you to let me handle it. This is police business. Is it? Because 20 years ago, the police didn't handle it. Whoever killed Jacob Whitmore walked free. Ray's face flushed. For a moment, Tom thought his oldest friend might take a swing at him. Instead, Ray turned away, stared out at the valley below. When he spoke again, his voice was tight. You don't know what you're digging into. Then tell me. I can't. Can't or won't. Ray didn't answer. He walked back to his patrol car, paused with his hand on the door. Take care of the horse. Let me know if he survives. But Tom, for your own good, don't go looking into this. Some stones are better left unturned. He drove away, leaving Tom standing in the dust with more questions than answers. At Doc's clinic, a converted barn on his property just outside town, they worked through the afternoon to stabilize the horse. Doc cleaned and dressed the wounds, pumped the animal full of antibiotics and fluids, monitored vital signs with equipment that looked more suited to a human hospital than a rural veterinary practice. Tom stayed, helping where he could, watching the horse struggle for survival. There was something almost human in its eyes, a depth of suffering that went beyond physical pain. This animal had been through more than abuse. It had been broken systematically and deliberately. He's a good horse, Doc said, stripping off his gloves as the sun began to set. Good bloodlines, I'd wager. Well-formed, strong bone structure despite the malnourishment. Someone invested time and money into breeding this animal. Then why try to kill him? Maybe they weren't trying to kill him. Maybe they just didn't care whether he lived or died. Doc washed his hands at the deep sink, dried them on a towel worn soft by years of use. Those symbols. You really think they're connected to the Whitmore case? I know they are. I was there that night, Wayne. I helped Ray process the scene. I saw those markings carved into the wood. Doc turned, studied Tom with the careful attention of a man weighing his words. Jacob Whitmore was my friend. We served on the school board together, coached Little League one summer. His daughter Rebecca was a sweet kid, used to help Sarah with the church bake sales. I remember. After Jacob died, things happened fast. Too fast. The investigation closed within a month. The official story was rustlers, professionals who hit and ran. But Jacob wasn't just robbed, he was executed. Single shot to the back of the head. That's not how rustlers work. Tom felt something cold settle in his chest. Why are you telling me this now? Because you're right. The case was never solved, just swept aside. And because if this horse is connected to what happened back then, you need to understand what you're walking into. Doc moved to the window, gazed out at his property. 3 days after Jacob's murder, I got a visit. 2 men I'd never seen before, dressed in nice suits. They told me the coroner's report would say Jacob died from a fall, hit his head on a beam. I told them I'd already documented the gunshot wound. They said I could change the report or I could lose my license. They had papers, medical board complaints already drawn up, all fictional but detailed enough to ruin me. Did you change it? No. I told them to go to hell. Doc's voice carried quiet pride. But 3 weeks later, the medical board did investigate me. Took 6 months and most of my savings to clear my name. The complaints were dropped as suddenly as they appeared, but the message was clear. Keep quiet or pay the price. Tom processed this, feeling the shape of something large and dark taking form. Who were they working for? I don't know, but I can tell you who benefited from Jacob's death. Vincent Rourke bought the Whitmore Ranch 6 months later, paid pennies on the dollar to Rebecca through an intermediary. That property bordered his own land, gave him control of the best water rights in the valley. Vincent Rourke. The name carried weight in Ironwood County. He owned the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, had his fingers in real estate, banking, local politics. He was rich, connected, and untouchable. You think Rourke killed Jacob? I think powerful men don't like questions. Doc turned back to face him. I'm telling you this because you're my friend, and because I owe it to Jacob's memory, but I'm also warning you, if this horse is connected to what happened 20 years ago, and if Vincent Rourke is involved, you're not just picking at an old wound. You're threatening a man who's proven he'll kill to protect his interests. The horse stirred in its stall, making a low sound of distress. Tom moved to its side, placed a hand on its neck. The animal calmed slightly at the touch. "He's got a name," Tom said quietly. "Or he did once. Rebecca Whitmore's father raised white horses. Had a stallion named Paladin, a 2-year-old colt when Jacob died. Never found after the murder. Doc joined him at the stall." "You think this is Paladin?" "I think he might be, and I think whoever took him 20 years ago just tried to dispose of evidence." "What are you going to do?" Tom looked at the horse, at the suffering written in every line of its body, and thought of Sarah. She would have wept at this cruelty. She would have demanded justice. "I'm going to save him, and then I'm going to find out who did this." "Even if it costs you everything?" Tom met his friend's eyes. "I've already lost everything that mattered." "What else can they take?" "Ghost." The name came to Tom in the middle of the night, 3 days after finding the horse. He sat in his kitchen, unable to sleep, watching the darkness beyond his windows. The horse had no identity, no past anyone would acknowledge, existed in a liminal space between life and death. Ghost seemed appropriate. Doc had cleared the animal for transport after 5 days of intensive care. The wounds were healing, the infection retreating under aggressive antibiotic treatment, but the psychological damage ran deeper. Ghost flinched at sudden movements, panicked at the sight of rope, and refused to eat unless he was alone. Trust, once shattered, required patient reconstruction. Tom converted the old barn into a recovery stall. He cleaned it thoroughly, replaced rotted boards, installed new lighting. The work felt good, purposeful. Sarah would have approved. She'd always believed idle hands bred troubled minds. Each morning and evening, Tom sat outside Ghost's stall, speaking softly, letting the animal grow accustomed to his presence. He didn't push, didn't demand. He simply existed in the horse's space, offering calm consistency. It was a technique Sarah had taught him years ago when they'd first started keeping horses. "Patience," she'd said. "Animals know when you're trying to force them. They need to come to you on their own terms." On the 6th day, Ghost ate while Tom was in the barn. On the 8th day, the horse allowed Tom to enter the stall. On the 10th day, Ghost took an apple from Tom's open palm, his soft muzzle warm against Tom's skin. Progress measured in small victories. But while Tom worked with Ghost, he also worked on something else. Late at night, after the ranch chores were done, he sat at his computer researching the Whitmore case. The internet had made information easier to access, though much of what he found felt sanitized, stripped of crucial details. The Ironwood Valley Gazette had archived its old issues online. Tom scrolled through articles from 20 years ago, reading and rereading the coverage of Jacob Whitmore's death. Local rancher found dead. Suspected robbery. The headline was dated October 14, 2 decades past. The article was brief, clinical. Jacob Whitmore, 51, discovered in his barn by his daughter Rebecca on the morning of October 13th. 3 horses missing, including the prize stallion Paladin. Sheriff's Department investigating. No suspects at this time. Follow-up articles grew progressively shorter. By December, the case had dropped from the front page. By February, it wasn't mentioned at all. The official conclusion, buried in a 3-paragraph piece in March, stated that investigators believed a professional rustling operation was responsible, likely long gone from Montana. Case closed. Justice unserved. Tom found Rebecca Whitmore's contact information through property records. She owned a small horse rescue operation in Sanders County, 2 hours northwest. The website was simple, functional. Photos of rescued horses, information about adoption, a donation button. Rebecca's bio was brief. "After losing my father to violence, I dedicated my life to giving abused and neglected horses a second chance." Tom stared at her photograph. She looked like her father. Same strong jaw, same direct gaze. But there was sadness in her eyes, the kind that never fully faded. He drafted an email 3 times, deleted it 3 times. What could he say that wouldn't sound insane? "I found a horse that might be your father's murdered 20 years ago," felt like the opening to a cruel joke. Finally, he settled on simple honesty. "Ms. Whitmore, my name is Tom Brennan. I live in Ironwood Valley and knew your father slightly. I've recently come into possession of a white horse, approximately 23 years old, with unusual markings. I have reason to believe this horse may be connected to your father's case. If you're willing, I'd like to speak with you. I understand this is unexpected and possibly painful. I wouldn't reach out if I didn't think it was important." He included his phone number and hit send before he could reconsider. The response came the next morning. Just 7 words, "I'll be there Saturday at noon." Tom spent the rest of the week preparing. He photographed Ghost's hooves, the carved symbols still visible though healing tissue had begun to obscure them. He printed out articles about the Whitmore case, organized his notes, tried to anticipate what questions Rebecca might ask. Friday afternoon, he drove to the Ironwood Valley Library, a small building that served as both library and historical society. Martha Henderson, the librarian, had worked there for 40 years and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of local history. "Tom Brennan." She smiled over her reading glasses. "Haven't seen you in ages. How are you managing?" "Getting by. I'm doing some research, Martha. About the Whitmore case." Her smile faded. "That's ancient history. Why dredge that up now?" "Personal curiosity." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward the back room. "Historical archives are in there. Newspaper microfilm, property records, some private papers donated over the years. You know how to work the machine? I'll figure it out." The archive room smelled of old paper and dust. Tom found the microfilm reels labeled with the relevant dates and threaded the first one into the reader. The enlarged newspaper pages flickered past, full of mundane small-town news. Church bake sales, high school football scores, birth announcements and obituaries. Then, October 14, 20 years ago. The story of Jacob Whitmore's death. But there were details here, in the physical newspaper, that hadn't made it to the digital archive. A sidebar article mentioned that Whitmore had recently filed a complaint with the county about illegal horse trading. Another brief mention noted that several other ranchers had reported missing livestock in the months before his death. Tom photographed the pages with his phone, then searched for more. He found property records showing the sale of Whitmore's ranch to Vincent Rourke through a holding company called Mountain Trust LLC. The sale price was listed as $280,000 for 800 acres of prime ranch land with water rights. Even 20 years ago, that was drastically undervalued. In a file box labeled Whitmore Estate, he found something else. Personal papers donated by Rebecca when she'd left town. Most were mundane. Tax records, receipts, correspondence about ranch business. But tucked in the back was a small leather notebook, Jacob Whitmore's personal journal. Tom glanced toward the door, then carefully opened the journal. The entries were sporadic, mostly notes about cattle prices and weather patterns. But in the weeks before his death, the tone changed. September 12, saw trucks at the old Mercer place again after midnight. No legitimate reason for activity there. Property's been abandoned for years. September 20, followed one of the trucks to Route 47. Lost them near the county line. Called Ray, but he said without proof of wrongdoing, he can't investigate. October 2, found fence cut on the north section. 3 yearlings missing. This is the 4th theft this year. Someone's running an operation and they're getting bolder. October 8, met with Vincent Rourke. He offered to buy my property, said he'd make it worth my while. I told him the ranch isn't for sale. He didn't take it well. There was a threat in his eyes, though his words stayed polite. The final entry was dated October 12, the day before Jacob died. I know what's happening now. The pieces fit together. Tomorrow I'm taking everything to the state police. Ray won't act, but I can't let this continue. If something happens to me, Rebecca needs to know. It's not about the horses. It's about what they represent. The watch will tell the story. The watch. Tom read the line 3 times. What watch? He photographed every page, returned the journal to its box, and left the library with more questions than he'd arrived with. Martha watched him go with an expression he couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or warning. That evening, Tom sat with Ghost, reading the journal entries aloud. The horse had grown comfortable with his voice, seemed calmer when Tom spoke. It was a one-sided conversation, but somehow it helped Tom think. Jacob knew something worth killing for. And he mentioned a watch. Tom leaned against the stall wall. A pocket watch, probably. Men of his generation carried them. My grandfather had one, passed down 3 generations. Ghost moved closer, allowed Tom to stroke his neck. The trust between them was growing, fragile but real. Rebecca's coming tomorrow. She'll want answers I don't have yet, but maybe together we can figure this out. A sound from outside the barn made Tom tense. Vehicle engine, distant but approaching. He stood, moved to the barn door and peered out. Headlights swept across his property, a truck he didn't recognize. It slowed near his driveway, idled for a moment, then continued past. Tom watched until the taillights disappeared. Probably nothing. This was a rural road, people passed through, but combined with everything else it felt like surveillance. He checked the locks on the barn, made sure Ghost had food and water, then returned to the house. Inside, he unlocked the desk drawer where his bronze star resided. Beneath the metal case was something else, a Colt 1911 pistol, his service weapon from the Army. He'd kept it maintained over the years, though he hadn't fired it in a decade. Tom loaded the magazine, chambered a round, and set the weapon on his nightstand. Sarah wouldn't have approved. She'd hated guns, had tolerated his keeping it only because she understood some habits from military service died hard. But Sarah wasn't here to object, and Tom had the distinct feeling that whatever he'd set in motion by finding Ghost was about to accelerate beyond his control. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house settle around him. Somewhere in the darkness answers waited. Somewhere in the past, truth had been buried. And somewhere, the people who'd killed Jacob Whitmore were watching, wondering what Tom Brennan knew and how far he was willing to go. Sleep came late and brought restless dreams. Sarah standing in a field of white horses, a pocket watch swinging on a chain, its face cracked and bloody. Ray Clayton's voice saying, "Some stones are better left unturned." Tom woke before dawn, the way he always did, and began another day. But the comfortable rhythms of his routine felt different now, charged with purpose and danger in equal measure. Saturday arrived bright and clear. Tom worked through his morning chores with unusual efficiency, then showered and changed into clean clothes. He wasn't sure why Rebecca Whitmore's visit felt like an occasion worth dressing for, only that it did. At 11:30, he heard a vehicle coming up his drive. Tom stepped onto the porch as a blue pickup pulled to a stop. The woman who emerged was 51 but could have passed for younger. She was tall, lean, with her father's strong features and prematurely gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans, boots, and a work shirt, the uniform of someone who spent their life with animals. Rebecca Whitmore studied Tom's ranch with an expression he couldn't quite read, recognition maybe, or pain at the familiar landscape of her childhood. "Mr. Brennan, Tom, please, thank you for coming." She nodded, her eyes already moving toward the barn. "Show me the horse." They walked in silence. Tom opened the barn door, led her to Ghost's stall. The horse stood in the back corner, alert but calm. When he saw Rebecca, something changed. His ears pricked forward. He took a tentative step toward the stall door. Rebecca's breath caught. She moved closer, gripped the stall bars with both hands. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent and unstoppable. "Paladin," she whispered. "Oh God, it's really you." Ghost, Paladin, whinnied softly and came to the stall door. Rebecca reached through, touched his face, and the horse leaned into her hand like he'd been waiting 20 years for exactly this moment. Tom stepped back, giving them space, understanding that he was witnessing something profound. A reunion that transcended time and trauma, that proved some bonds survived even the worst attempts to destroy them. When Rebecca finally turned to face him, her expression had hardened into something fierce and determined. "Tell me everything," she said, "and then tell me how we're going to make them pay." They sat at Tom's kitchen table, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn wood. Rebecca held a mug of coffee she hadn't touched, her eyes distant, focused on memories Tom couldn't see. "I was 29 when Dad died," she said quietly. "I'd moved back home after my divorce, was helping him run the ranch. That morning I went out to the barn to feed the horses and found him lying in the aisle. There was so much blood." Tom waited, letting her speak at her own pace. The official story was robbery, rustlers, professional criminals who hit and ran. But Dad wasn't tied up. He wasn't beaten. He was executed. One shot to the back of the head, close range. That's not how thieves work. That's how you silence someone. Your father's journal mentioned he was planning to go to the state police. Rebecca's head snapped up. "What journal?" It's in the historical archives at the library. You donated his papers when you left. I donated boxes of ranch records. I never looked through them. After Dad died, I couldn't. She set down the coffee mug, her hands shaking slightly. What did the journal say? Tom pulled out his phone, showed her the photographs he'd taken. Rebecca read in silence, her face growing paler with each entry. When she reached the final one, she looked up at Tom with eyes full of old rage. The watch. Dad's pocket watch. Her voice was barely a whisper. It was a Hamilton, solid gold, engraved with his initials. His grandfather carried it through World War I, passed it down through 3 generations. Dad wore it every day of his life. It wasn't found after his death? No. The sheriff's department said it must have been stolen along with the horses. But Dad would never have parted with that watch willingly. If someone took it, they had to kill him first. Tom felt the pieces beginning to align. He said the watch would tell the story. What did he mean? Rebecca stood, paced to the window, stared out at the mountains. Dad was meticulous about documentation. He photographed everything: cattle, horses, property improvements. It drove Mom crazy. He'd spend hours organizing files, labeling photographs, keeping records. He suspected something criminal was happening. More than suspected. In the weeks before he died, he was obsessed. He'd drive out at night, watching the old Mercer property. He'd come home with photographs, notes telling me he was building a case. I thought he was being paranoid. What was happening at the Mercer place? I don't know. It's 20 miles from here, up in the high country. The family abandoned it in the 70s. The buildings are half collapsed, the land's worthless for grazing. But Dad was convinced someone was using it. Tom made a note to investigate the property. Your father met with Vincent Rourke. Rebecca's expression hardened. Rourke came to the ranch 4 times in the month before Dad died. Each time, he made an offer for our property. Each time, Dad refused. The last visit, I was there. Rourke wasn't subtle. He said the valley was changing, that men who didn't adapt got left behind. Dad told him to leave and not come back. And 6 months later, Rourke owned your ranch, through a company called Mountain Trust. They approached me 3 weeks after Dad's funeral. Mom was in the hospital by then. Grief had broken something in her. I was drowning in medical bills and funeral costs. They offered just enough to cover the debts and give me a fresh start somewhere else. I took it because I didn't know what else to do. You were forced out. I was. Rebecca turned from the window. And for 20 years, I've lived with the guilt of that decision. I abandoned my father's land, his legacy, his memory. I told myself I was moving on, but really I was running away. You were surviving, Tom said gently. There's no shame in that. She smiled sadly. You sound like the counselor I finally saw 10 years later. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are different things. Tom understood that truth intimately. 3 years since Sarah's death, and he still woke some mornings expecting to find her beside him. Tell me about Paladin, he said. Rebecca's expression softened. Dad bred him. The dam was our best mare. The sire was a champion from a ranch near Helena. Paladin was born in spring, March 15th. Dad was so proud. He said that Colt would put our breeding program on the map. She paused, lost in memory. I was there when he was born. Dad stayed up all night in the barn, and I stayed with him. We watched that foal take his first steps. Dad named him Paladin because he said the horse had the bearing of a knight. What happened to the mare? She was one of the 3 horses stolen. We found her body a month later in a ravine 15 miles away. She'd been shot. The other horse, a gelding named Ranger, was never found. Tom absorbed this, adding it to the growing picture of calculated cruelty. Someone went to considerable effort to eliminate evidence. They didn't eliminate Paladin. No. Which raises the question of why. If they killed the mare, why keep the stallion alive? Rebecca considered this. Paladin had exceptional bloodlines. On paper, he was worth $50,000 even as a 2-year-old. Maybe someone saw profit in keeping him alive. For 20 years, breeding stock. If they could alter his identity, create false papers, they could have made hundreds of thousands from stud fees. It made a sick kind of sense. Tom thought of the carved symbols on Paladin's hooves. They tried to change his identity. But your father must have marked him somehow, something permanent they couldn't erase. Rebecca's eyes widened. The photograph. Wait here. She hurried to her truck, returned with a leather portfolio. Inside were dozens of photographs, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. She flipped through them quickly, found what she was looking for. Here. The photograph showed Jacob Whitmore standing beside a white foal, both of them in the barn. The image quality was good, clearly taken by someone who knew photography. Jacob was smiling, one hand on the foal's shoulder, and there, just visible on the foal's left hip, was a brand mark. Tom pulled out his phone, opened the photographs he'd taken of Paladin. He zoomed in on the horse's left hip. The scar tissue was old, heavily layered, but beneath it you could just make out the ghost of an earlier mark. They tried to obliterate the brand, he said. Burned over it, maybe multiple times. But you can still see traces of the original. Rebecca traced the image with her finger. That's Dad's mark, the circle W. I'd know it anywhere. They had proof. Not conclusive, not the kind that would hold up in court without supporting evidence, but enough to confirm that Ghost was indeed Paladin and that someone had gone to great lengths to hide his identity. Rebecca, I need to ask you something difficult. Tom met her eyes. When the investigation was happening, did anyone pressure you to accept the official story? She was quiet for a long moment. Yes. Mayor Hutchins came to see me. He was very sympathetic, very kind. He said the best thing I could do for Dad's memory was to let the investigation run its course, to trust the authorities. He said if I started making accusations without proof, I'd only hurt Dad's reputation. Bradley Hutchins has been mayor for 25 years. He and Rourke are friends. They golf together, serve on the same boards. When Hutchins suggested I sell the ranch and make a fresh start, I thought he was being helpful. Now I wonder if he was being strategic. Tom thought about the network of power in small towns, how a few influential men could shape outcomes through pressure and persuasion. Who else? Sheriff Clayton. He was a deputy back then, but he was in charge of the investigation. He came to see me 3 days after Dad died. He said he was doing everything possible to find the killers, but that I needed to be patient. He told me that sometimes cases like this never get solved, and I should prepare myself for that possibility. Ray knew your father was planning to go to the state police. How do you know that? Tom showed her the journal entry where Jacob mentioned calling Ray. Your father tried to report the illegal activity through official channels. Ray told him he couldn't investigate without proof. Rebecca's face flushed with anger. So Ray knew Dad was in danger and did nothing, or Ray was told to do nothing. The implication hung in the air between them. If Ray Clayton had been pressured or threatened into inaction, it meant the conspiracy went deeper than simple greed. It meant there was an organized effort to protect whatever operation Jacob Whitmore had discovered. I need to see the Mercer property, Tom said. I'll go with you. Rebecca, if I'm right about this, then the people involved have already killed once. They might not hesitate to kill again. All the more reason to have backup. Her voice was firm. Besides, you'll need someone who knows the area. I grew up exploring those mountains. Tom wanted to argue, but he recognized the determination in her eyes. It was the same look Sarah used to get when she'd made up her mind about something. Arguing was pointless. Tomorrow then. Early, before anyone notices we're gone. They spent the rest of the afternoon with Paladin. Rebecca worked with the horse as naturally as breathing, speaking to him in a low, constant murmur, re-establishing the bond they'd shared 2 decades ago. Paladin responded to her in ways he hadn't with Tom, showing glimpses of the magnificent animal he'd once been beneath the trauma. He remembers, Rebecca said, wonder in her voice. After all this time, he remembers me. Tom watched from outside the stall, moved by the reunion in ways he couldn't fully articulate. There was something profound in witnessing love that survived despite every attempt to destroy it. As the sun began to set, Rebecca finally left the stall. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was peace in her face that hadn't been there before. Thank you, she said to Tom, for finding him, for keeping him safe, for caring enough to reach out to me. I haven't done much yet. You've done more than anyone else has in 20 years. They agreed that Rebecca would stay at the motel in town and return in the morning. As she drove away, Tom stood on his porch watching the twilight settle over the valley. The mountains were dark silhouettes against the fading light, ancient and impassive, holding their secrets close. His phone rang. Ray Clayton. Tom, we need to talk. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you meet me at the old lumber yard? 20 minutes? Tom hesitated. The lumber yard had been closed for a decade, sat abandoned on the edge of town. It was isolated, private, either the perfect place for a confidential conversation or the perfect place for an ambush. I'll be there. He hung up, went inside, and retrieved his Colt from the nightstand. He checked the magazine, confirmed a round was chambered, and tucked the weapon into his waistband at the small of his back. Then he wrote a brief note explaining where he'd gone and left it on the kitchen table where it would be found if something happened to him. The drive to the lumber yard took 15 minutes. Tom arrived early, parked where he had a clear view of the entrance, and waited. Ray's patrol car pulled in exactly on time. The sheriff got out slowly, hands visible, moving like a man who expected trouble. Tom stepped from his truck, keeping his right hand free. "You're armed," Ray said. It wasn't a question. These days, it seems prudent. Ray nodded, looked around the empty lot as if checking for watchers, then gestured to a picnic table someone had left years ago. They sat across from each other, the wood weathered and splintered between them. "I'm going to tell you something," Ray said, "and when I'm done, you're going to understand why I've kept quiet for 20 years. Tom waited. The night Jacob Whitmore died, I was the first officer on scene. Rebecca had called it in. She was hysterical. I got there maybe 10 minutes after she found the body." Ray's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. Jacob had been shot execution style, just like you said, but there was something else. His pocket watch was lying next to him, covered in blood. The crystal was shattered, but the watch was still ticking. Rebecca said the watch was never found, because I took it. Ray pulled something from his pocket, set it on the table between them. A gold pocket watch, its face cracked and stained dark with old blood. I picked it up before anyone else arrived. I didn't know why, just instinct. Something told me it was important. Tom stared at the watch. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because you've already gone too far to turn back. Because Rebecca deserves to know the truth. And because I'm tired of being a coward." Ray opened the watch. Inside the back cover, secured with tape that had yellowed with age, was a micro SD card. Jacob was documenting everything, Ray said. That card contains photographs, video, recordings, evidence of an organized horse theft and trafficking ring operating out of the Mercer property. Vincent Rourke owned it through a shell company, used it as a distribution hub. They were stealing horses from across 3 states, altering identities, selling them through fraudulent auctions. Tom's mind raced. "You've had proof for 20 years. I've had a death sentence for 20 years. Ray's voice cracked. 3 days after Jacob's murder, 2 men came to my house. They knew I had the watch. They showed me photographs of my wife leaving the grocery store, my daughter at her college campus. They told me if I gave them the watch or spoke about what I knew, my family would disappear. They said they'd make it slow, make me watch. Then they'd kill me last." Tom felt cold fury building in his chest. Who were they? Professionals. Not local. The kind of men who kill for a living and sleep fine afterward. Ray met his eyes. "I made a choice. I protected my family and let a murderer walk free. I've lived with that choice every day since. I buried the watch in my backyard, told myself I'd dig it up when the time was right. But the time was never right, and the years kept passing. Why now? Because my daughter's grown, married, living in Seattle. Because my wife died last year. Cancer took her, but at least she died safe. And because I can't take this guilt to my own grave." Ray pushed the watch across the table. "That card is 20 years old. The technology's obsolete, but the data should still be there. You want to know who killed Jacob Whitmore? It's all on that card." Tom picked up the watch, felt its weight in his palm. This small object had cost Jacob his life, had kept Ray silent for 2 decades, and might finally deliver justice. "What happens when this comes out?" Tom asked. "I'll lose my job, probably face charges for obstruction and evidence tampering. I'll lose my pension, my reputation, but I'll finally be able to look at myself in the mirror." Ray stood, looked old and tired in the fading light. "Do what you need to do, Tom. Just be careful. The men who threatened me 20 years ago might be older now, but I doubt they've gotten softer." He walked back to his patrol car, drove away without looking back. Tom sat alone in the abandoned lumber yard, holding a dead man's watch and wondering how many lives would change once its secrets were revealed. He drove home as darkness fell, checking his mirrors constantly, alert to any sign of surveillance. The ranch looked peaceful when he arrived, but Tom no longer trusted appearances. Inside, he locked the doors, closed the blinds, and sat at his desk. The micro SD card required an adapter he didn't have, but Fletcher's general store would sell one. Tonight, he'd keep the watch safe. He called Rebecca. "We need to move up our timeline. Can you be here at dawn? What happened?" "Ray gave me something. Evidence, the kind that changes everything. I'll be there before sunrise." Tom ended the call and sat in the darkness of his home, holding the watch, thinking about justice delayed and truth buried, and the weight of secrets that grew heavier with each passing year. Outside, the Montana night pressed close, vast and silent. And somewhere in that darkness, men who'd killed to protect their interests were probably wondering what Tom Brennan knew and how to make him stop asking questions. He cleaned his pistol, checked the ammunition, and prepared for the morning that would start them down a road with no turning back. Rebecca arrived at 5:30 in the morning, the sky still dark but beginning to lighten at the edges. Tom had been awake for an hour, coffee made, gear packed. They loaded supplies into his truck, water, first aid kit, binoculars, and Tom's Colt, which he showed her without apology. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said, "but I'm not walking into it unprepared either." Rebecca nodded. She'd brought her own weapon, a .38 revolver she carried when working with horses in remote areas. Neither of them spoke about the implications of being armed. The necessity was understood. The drive to the Mercer property took 45 minutes on roads that deteriorated from paved to gravel to barely maintained dirt tracks. They climbed into the high country, through stands of pine and aspen, past abandoned mining claims and forgotten homesteads. The sun rose behind them, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. "I used to ride up here with Dad," Rebecca said quietly. These mountains were his cathedral. He said they reminded him that his problems were small in the grand scheme of things. Tom understood that sentiment. The landscape had a way of putting human concerns in perspective, making clear how brief and insignificant individual lives were against the backdrop of geological time. The Mercer property sat in a narrow valley between two ridges. The original homestead buildings were still standing, though barely. The house was a shell, windows broken, roof collapsed on one side. The barn was in better condition, its structure sound despite years of weathering. Tom parked a quarter-mile away, behind a screen of trees. They approached on foot, moving quietly, watching for any sign of recent activity. The property appeared abandoned, reclaimed by nature, exactly as you'd expect from a place unused for decades. But as they got closer, Tom noticed details that didn't fit. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt near the barn, cigarette butts that hadn't been weathered by rain, a padlock on the barn door that showed no rust. "Someone's using this place," Rebecca whispered. They circled the barn, looking for entry points. The windows were too high to see through easily, but Tom found a gap in the wallboards wide enough to peer inside. The interior was dark, but his eyes adjusted enough to make out shapes. Empty stalls, some with fresh hay. A tack room with equipment that looked maintained rather than abandoned. And in the center of the space, something covered by a tarp. "We need to get inside," Tom said. "That lock looks new." Tom studied it. Industrial grade, expensive. Not the kind of lock you put on an abandoned barn. "Stay here and keep watch. I'll find another way in." He moved around to the back of the barn where a loading door hung at an angle, its hinges rusted. Tom pulled carefully, and the door swung open with a squeal of metal. He froze, listening, but heard only wind and the distant call of crows. Inside, the barn smelled of hay and leather and something else. Chemical, sharp. Tom moved carefully, letting his eyes adjust further to the gloom. He approached the tarp-covered object, gripped the edge, and pulled it free. Underneath was a workbench with equipment that looked medical, branding irons, surgical tools, bottles of sedatives and antiseptics, and next to the bench, a computer setup with hard drives and monitors showing what appeared to be database files. Tom's stomach tightened. This wasn't just a distribution hub for stolen horses. This was where they altered identities, created false documentation, maintained records of their entire operation. He was photographing the setup with his phone when he heard Rebecca's sharp whistle, their agreed-upon warning signal. Tom moved quickly to the window, peered out, and saw what had alarmed her. 2 trucks were coming up the valley road, moving fast, throwing dust. Tom's first instinct was to run, but something stopped him. If they fled now, whoever was coming would know someone had been here. They'd destroy the evidence, relocate the operation. This might be their only chance. He moved to the computer, powered it on. The system booted slowly. While he waited, Tom searched the barn more thoroughly. In the tack room, he found filing cabinets. Locked, but the keys hung on a hook nearby. Arrogance or simply the assumption that no one would ever find this place. The files contained exactly what Ray's watch had promised. Records of stolen horses going back 20 years. Names, dates, locations. False pedigree papers, auction records showing horses sold for tens of thousands of dollars, and financial documents showing money flowing through various accounts to a central recipient. Vincent Rourke's name appeared on dozens of pages. The trucks were getting closer. Tom grabbed as many files as he could carry, stuffed them into his jacket. The computer had finished booting. He found an external drive in his pocket. He'd brought it hoping for exactly this, and started copying files. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. "Tom, they're almost here. We need to go. 30 seconds. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 20%, 40%. The sound of truck engines grew louder. 60%, 80%. Tom! 100%. Tom grabbed the drive, shoved it in his pocket, and ran. They made it out the back door and into the tree line just as the trucks pulled up to the barn. Tom and Rebecca crouched behind a fallen log, watching as 4 men got out. One of them Tom recognized, Vincent Rourke himself, unmistakable even at this distance. Rourke walked to the barn door, noticed immediately that something was wrong. He pulled a phone from his pocket, made a call, his body language radiating anger. "We need to move," Tom whispered, quietly and quickly. They worked their way back through the forest toward Tom's truck, moving as silently as possible over the rough terrain. Behind them they heard shouting. Someone had found evidence of their intrusion. They reached the truck, got in, and Tom started the engine. He resisted the urge to floor it, keeping their speed reasonable, trying not to draw attention. But as they descended from the high country, Tom saw in his rearview mirror what he'd feared. One of the trucks had broken away from the barn and was following them. "We've got company," he said. Rebecca twisted to look. "Can we outrun them? Not in this terrain, and I don't want to lead them straight back to my ranch." Tom's mind raced through options. The roads up here were limited, most of them ending at old mines or logging sites. But there was one route that might work. He took a turnoff that headed east toward the state forest. The road was rougher, but it led to a ranger station that would be staffed this time of year. Witnesses, official presence. Their pursuers might break off rather than be seen. The truck behind them accelerated, closing the distance. Tom pushed his own vehicle faster, the suspension taking a beating on the rutted road. Rebecca braced herself against the dashboard. They came around a curve and Tom saw what he'd been hoping for, the ranger station ahead, with 2 official trucks parked outside. He pulled in fast, parked directly in front of the main building. The truck following them slowed, drove past without stopping, but Tom caught a glimpse of the driver's face through the window. Not one of Rourke's usual ranch hands. This man was younger, harder, with the flat expression of someone comfortable with violence. Tom and Rebecca sat for a moment, breathing hard, coming down from the adrenaline. A forest ranger emerged from the building, concerned by their dramatic arrival. "Everything all right?" Tom forced a smile. "Just some trouble with the transmission. Mind if we park here for a bit while the engine cools?" The ranger nodded, satisfied with the explanation, and went back inside. Tom waited until he was gone, then turned to Rebecca. "We need to get this evidence somewhere safe, somewhere Rourke can't reach it." "Your ranch isn't safe?" "Not anymore. They know we were at the Mercer property. They'll be watching my place, waiting for an opportunity. Rebecca thought for a moment. Maria Santos. She and my mother were close. She'd help us. Tom nodded. Maria was trustworthy, and her diner was public enough that Rourke couldn't make a move without witnesses. We'll go there. But first, we need to find an adapter for Ray's SD card. I want to see what's on it before we decide our next move. They drove into town an hour later, Tom constantly checking his mirrors. No one appeared to be following, but he no longer trusted appearances. Fletcher's General Store provided the adapter they needed. Then they went to Maria's diner. It was mid-morning, the breakfast rush over, only a few customers lingering over coffee. Maria's eyes widened when she saw them come in together. Tom. Rebecca Whitmore. Lord, I haven't seen you in... We need your help, Tom said quietly. Is there somewhere private we can talk? Maria's expression shifted from surprise to concern. She looked at their faces, saw something that made her nod immediately. Office in back. Come on. The office was small, cluttered with paperwork and supplies, but it had a door that locked and no windows. Maria closed them in, crossed her arms. Talk. Tom laid it out as simply as he could. The horse, the evidence, the journal, Ray's confession, the Mercer property, the men following them. As he spoke, Maria's face cycled through shock, anger, and something that looked like vindication. I knew it, she said when he finished. All these years, I knew Jacob didn't die in some random robbery. But no one would listen. We need somewhere to keep this safe, Rebecca said, gesturing to the files and drives. Somewhere they won't think to look. Maria didn't hesitate. I've got a safe in my house. Fireproof, bolted to the foundation. Carlos had it installed when he started keeping cash at home. No one knows about it except me. Maria, if Rourke finds out you're helping us, let him come. Her voice was steel. Jacob was my friend. Sarah was my friend. I've watched this town rot from the inside for 20 years while men like Vincent Rourke got richer and more powerful. If I can help bring him down, I'll do it and sleep fine after. Tom felt gratitude and fear in equal measure. They were gathering allies, but they were also putting those allies in danger. Maria took the files and drives, promised to secure them within the hour. What's your next move? We look at what's on Ray's card, Tom said. Then we decide whether to go to the state police or handle this ourselves. Be careful, both of you. Maria gripped Rebecca's hand. Your father would be proud of you, honey. And Tom, Sarah would be too. They left through the back door, taking Maria's suggestion to avoid being seen leaving together. Tom drove Rebecca back to his ranch by a circuitous route, doubling back twice to ensure they weren't followed. At the ranch, Tom checked on Paladin first. The horse was agitated, pacing his stall, as if he sensed the tension in the air. Tom spent a few minutes calming him, speaking softly, before rejoining Rebecca in the house. He set up his laptop at the kitchen table, inserted the SD card with its adapter, and opened the drive. What they found in the next hour would change everything. The card contained hundreds of files, photographs, videos, audio recordings, spreadsheets. Jacob Whitmore had been thorough, documenting every aspect of the operation he'd uncovered. Photos showed trucks arriving at the Mercer property at night, horses being unloaded, brands being altered. Videos captured conversations, men discussing prices and transport routes, and the mechanics of creating false pedigrees. Audio recordings featured phone calls where names were named and crimes were planned. But it was the spreadsheet that proved most damning. Jacob had tracked the money, following it from the initial thefts through the sales to the final recipients. The amounts were staggering. Over $15 million across 20 years. And the recipients weren't just Vincent Rourke. Mayor Bradley Hutchins received monthly payments through a consulting company. The county prosecutor, David Chen, showed deposits coinciding with cases being dropped or delayed. 3 other prominent business owners in the valley appeared on the payroll, and at the bottom of one list, a name that made Tom's blood run cold, Sheriff Raymond Clayton. Monthly payments of $5,000, starting 2 years before Jacob's murder and continuing to the present day. Rebecca saw it at the same time. Ray was part of it. This whole time, he was part of it. Tom's mind reeled. Ray's confession, the watch, his apparent guilt, all of it was manipulation. Ray hadn't been protecting his family, He'd been protecting his income. The men who threatened him, Tom said slowly, if they existed at all, they were probably working for Rourke, making sure Ray stayed loyal. So when he gave you the watch, he knew we'd find this. He knew we'd see his name. But he's betting we'll focus on Rourke and the others, that his confession will make him look like a victim instead of a collaborator. The realization left Tom feeling sick. He'd trusted Ray, had believed his friend was burdened by guilt and trying to make amends. Instead, Ray had been feeding them information to control the narrative, to position himself as a tragic figure rather than a willing participant. Rebecca stood, paced the kitchen. What do we do? We can't go to local law enforcement. Ray's compromised and he probably has deputies on his payroll too. The prosecutor is bought. Even the mayor is involved. State police? Maybe. But Rourke has had 20 years to build connections. Who knows how far his influence reaches? Tom closed the laptop, thinking hard. We need leverage, something so public and undeniable that even Rourke's connections can't bury it. How? Tom thought of the journal still hidden in his barn by whoever had broken in. He'd dismissed it as random, but now he wondered. Someone's playing both sides. Someone left evidence for me to find, maybe hoping I'd do exactly what we're doing. Dig into this, stir things up. Who would do that? Someone who wants Rourke taken down but can't do it themselves. Someone inside the operation who's looking for a way out. They spent the next hour reviewing the files more carefully, looking for clues. And slowly, a pattern emerged. Certain entries in the spreadsheets were flagged with a symbol, a small red tenth. When they cross-referenced those entries with the other files, they realized the marked transactions all involved a specific person handling the logistics. A man named Michael Torres, Rourke's ranch manager for the past 15 years. He's the one, Rebecca said. He's the insider. Tom pulled up what little information he could find on Torres. Former military, worked as a ranch hand at several operations before joining Rourke. No criminal record, kept a low profile. But in several of Jacob's photos, Torres was visible in the background, always watching, his expression unreadable. We need to find him, Tom said. If he's the one who left the journal, if he's willing to testify, we might have enough to go to federal authorities. Rebecca checked her phone. Rourke's ranch is 15 miles from here. Torres would be there. We can't just walk up and ask to see him. No. But I know someone who might be able to help. She made a call, spoke briefly, hung up. Doc Harris treated some of Rourke's horses last month. He has a contact number for Torres. I told him to call and say one of the horses needs a follow-up. Ask Torres to meet him in town tomorrow afternoon. Tom nodded. It was risky, but everything about this situation was risky. If Torres agrees to meet, we'll be there. If he's the insider, we'll convince him to go on record. And if he's not, then we find another way. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Tom made copies of the most damning files, stored them in multiple locations. Cloud storage, physical drives hidden at the ranch, copies left with Maria. If something happened to them, the evidence would survive. As evening fell, Tom stood on his porch, watching the sunset. Rebecca joined him, both of them silent, processing everything they'd learned. My father died trying to expose these people, she said finally. For 20 years, I've wondered if it was worth it. If he should have just stayed quiet, stayed safe. What do you think now? I think he didn't have a choice. Not really. When you see evil and do nothing, you become part of it. She turned to face Tom. We're in too deep to turn back now. You know that, right? I know. People might get hurt. We might get hurt. I know that too. Rebecca smiled, sad but determined. Sarah must have been something special to end up with a man like you. She was. But I think your father was something special too. And I think he raised a daughter worthy of his memory. They stood together as darkness fell, two people bound by loss and purpose, preparing to fight a battle that had been waiting 20 years to be fought. Inside the barn, Paladin whinnied softly, as if sensing the storm that was coming. Tom didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table, Sarah's wedding ring in his palm, turning it over and over, feeling its familiar weight. He'd worn it on a chain around his neck since her funeral, couldn't bring himself to put it away. Sometimes he forgot it was there. Other times, like tonight, it felt heavy as an anchor. Sarah would have told him to be careful. She would have worried, would have tried to talk him into letting the authorities handle it. but she also would have understood why he couldn't walk away. She'd had her own streak of stubbornness, her own sense of right and wrong that wouldn't bend for convenience. "I miss you," he whispered to the empty kitchen. "I miss knowing you're here to come home to." The ring offered no answers, just the cold comfort of metal and memory. At dawn, Doc Harris called. Torres agreed to meet. 2 o'clock at the diner. He sounded nervous. That's a good sign. Nervous means he has something to hide or something to reveal. "Tom, be careful with this. If Torres is playing both sides, this could be a trap." "I know. We'll be ready." Tom spent the morning preparing with the same methodical attention he'd learned in the service. He cleaned his Colt, loaded extra magazines, checked his truck's fuel and tire pressure. He walked his property line, looking for signs of surveillance or intrusion. Everything appeared normal, but normal had become a relative concept. Rebecca arrived at noon. She'd spent the night at the motel, had barely slept either. They ate a simple lunch neither of them tasted, going over the plan one more time. "We approach Torres carefully," Tom said. "Feel him out before we show our cards. If he's hostile, we leave immediately. If he seems willing to talk, we show him enough evidence to make him realize we're serious. And if he tries something—" Tom touched the Colt at his waistband. "Then we defend ourselves and get out." They arrived at Maria's diner 15 minutes early. Maria had closed for the afternoon, put a sign in the window claiming a burst pipe. The parking lot was empty except for her car. She let them in through the back door, locked it behind them. "I don't like this," she said. "This feels dangerous." "It is dangerous," Tom agreed, "but it's necessary." Maria had set up a booth in the back corner where they could talk privately. Tom and Rebecca sat on one side, leaving the opposite bench for Torres. Tom positioned himself with a clear view of the door and the windows. At 2 o'clock exactly, a truck pulled into the parking lot. A man got out, Hispanic, mid-40s, with the weathered face and solid build of someone who worked outside. He approached the door cautiously, tried the handle, found it locked. Maria let him in. "Mr. Torres?" she said. "Come in. They're waiting for you." Torres stepped inside, his eyes immediately finding Tom and Rebecca. Recognition flashed across his face when he saw Rebecca. "Ms. Whitmore." "I didn't expect to see you here. You knew my father." "I knew of him. I was working down in New Mexico when he died. I didn't come to the valley until 5 years later." Torres moved to the booth but didn't sit. He looked between Tom and Rebecca, his posture tense. "Doc Harris said one of the horses needed attention." "I don't see any horses." "Sit down, Michael," Tom said quietly. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About the journal you left in my barn, about the operation at the Mercer property, about Vincent Rourke and 20 years of horse theft and murder." Torres's face went pale. He glanced at the door as if calculating his chances of reaching it. Tom shook his head slightly. "We're not here to threaten you. We're here because we think you want the same thing we do. To end this." Torres stood frozen for a long moment, then slowly sank into the booth. He put his face in his hands, and when he looked up, his eyes were haunted. "How did you know it was me?" "The files Jacob Whitmore compiled. Certain entries were marked. All of them involved you. It wasn't hard to put together. I didn't kill anyone." Torres's voice was urgent, desperate to be believed. "I swear to God, I never hurt anyone. But you've been part of Rourke's operation for 15 years. I didn't have a choice." He leaned forward, words spilling out like confession. "I was working at a ranch in Arizona, minding my own business. Rourke recruited me, offered twice what I was making. I took the job not knowing what I was getting into. By the time I figured out the operation, I was already compromised. Rourke made sure of that." "How?" "He had me sign documents, told me it was standard ranch paperwork. Later I found out I'd put my name on false pedigree certificates, bill of sale forms for stolen horses. If I tried to leave or talk, he could pin everything on me. I'd go to prison while he walked free." Rebecca's voice was hard. "My father didn't have that luxury. He tried to do the right thing and got killed for it." Torres met her eyes. "I know. And I'm sorry. I've been sorry for 15 years, but I was scared. I have a family, a wife and 3 kids. Rourke made it clear what would happen if I crossed him." "So you left the journal for me to find," Tom said. "Why?" "Because I'm tired. Tired of being afraid, tired of being complicit, tired of watching Rourke get away with it. When you found that horse, When you started asking questions, I saw an opportunity. Someone from outside the operation, someone Rourke couldn't control or intimidate easily. I thought if I gave you enough information, you might be able to do what I couldn't. We have evidence, Rebecca said. Files, recordings, financial records, everything my father compiled, plus what we found at the Mercer property. But we need someone on the inside to testify, to verify the evidence and explain how the operation works. Torres was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to sign my own death warrant. We're asking you to do what's right. Right doesn't mean much when you're dead. But even as he said it, Torres's expression was conflicted. He wanted to say yes. Tom could see it in his eyes, the same look he'd seen in Sarah's face when she was wrestling with difficult decisions. We can protect you, Tom said. Federal witness protection. Your whole family relocated with new identities. Rourke would never find you. You can't promise that. No. But I can promise that if you do nothing, you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder wondering when Rourke will decide you're a liability. Torres's hands trembled on the table. I need time to think. We don't have time. Rourke knows someone's investigating. He'll move the operation, destroy evidence. If we're going to act, it has to be now. How do I know you're not setting me up? That you won't take my testimony and leave me exposed? Tom reached into his pocket, pulled out a flash drive. This contains copies of everything we have. Take it, review it. You'll see we're serious. Then decide if you want to help us or if you want to keep living in fear. Torres took the drive, held it like it might explode. If I do this, if I agree to testify, I'll need guarantees. Real guarantees, not just promises. We'll arrange a meeting with federal investigators, Rebecca said. The FBI has jurisdiction over interstate criminal enterprises. They can offer protection, immunity in exchange for cooperation. But we need your commitment first. Torres stood, the flash drive clutched in his fist. 24 hours. Give me 24 hours to review this, to talk to my wife, to figure out if I can really do this. He looked at Rebecca. Your father was a good man. Everyone said so. He didn't deserve what happened to him. No, he didn't. But you have a chance to make it mean something, to ensure he didn't die for nothing. Torres nodded, then left quickly, his truck pulling out of the parking lot and disappearing down Main Street. Maria emerged from the kitchen where she'd been listening. Do you trust him? I don't know, Tom admitted, but he's our best chance. They spent the rest of the afternoon at Tom's ranch, waiting. The tension was exhausting, every sound making them alert, every vehicle on the distant road a potential threat. Tom checked on Paladin repeatedly, finding comfort in the routine of caring for the horse. Rebecca worked with Paladin too, continuing the rehabilitation with the patient skill of someone who understood that healing took time. The horse responded to her in remarkable ways, showing glimpses of the magnificent animal he'd once been. He's getting stronger, she said, stroking his neck. Another few weeks, and he'll be ready to move to my rescue. He'll be safe there. Will you be safe? Tom asked. When this is over, assuming we survive, Rourke's people will know you were involved. I've been running for 20 years. I'm done running. Rebecca's voice was firm. Whatever happens, I'm seeing this through. As evening approached, Tom's phone rang, an unknown number. He answered cautiously. Mr. Brennan? The voice was young, female, frightened. This is Elena Torres, Michael's wife. He sent me the files you gave him. We've been reviewing them together. And? We want to help. But Michael is scared. Someone followed him home from the diner. A black SUV with tinted windows. It parked down the street for an hour, then left. We think Rourke knows he met with you. Tom's jaw tightened. Where are you now? Home. But Michael says we need to leave tonight. Take the kids and go somewhere safe until this is resolved. That's smart. Do you have somewhere to go? My sister in Colorado. We're packing now. Elena paused. Michael wants you to know he'll testify. But he needs protection starting now, not in 24 hours. Can you arrange that? Tom thought quickly. Yes. But it'll take a few hours. Can you hold out until midnight? We'll try. Just please, don't let anything happen to my family. I give you my word. Tom hung up and immediately called Doc Harris. Wayne, I need your help. Can you contact that state investigator you mentioned? We need federal involvement, and we need it tonight. Doc didn't hesitate. I'll make the call. What's the situation? Tom explained quickly. Doc listened, then said, The investigator's name is Sarah Chen. She's good people, works out of the Great Falls field office. I'll call her now, explain that we have a witness ready to testify about a major criminal enterprise. She'll have to clear it with her superiors, but she should be able to move fast. How fast? Few hours, maybe. I'll push for urgency. Tom hung up and turned to Rebecca. We need to get Torres and his family somewhere safe until the FBI arrives. Where? Tom thought of his ranch, isolated and defendable. Here. It's not perfect, but it's better than leaving them exposed in town, and I can watch the approach roads, see anyone coming before they arrive. They drove into town carefully, watching for surveillance. At the Torres house, a modest home on the edge of Ironwood, they found Michael loading suitcases into his truck while his wife herded 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, ages ranging from maybe 6 to 12. Thank God, Elena said when she saw them. We were about to leave on our own. You'll follow us, Tom said. Stay close. If anything feels wrong, if you see anyone following, call my cell immediately. The drive back to the ranch was tense. Tom kept checking his mirrors, alert for any sign of pursuit. Rebecca rode with the Torres family, providing reassurance and watching their backs. But the roads remained clear, and they reached the ranch without incident. Tom got the family settled in his house, the kids excited by the adventure, not understanding the danger. Elena made sandwiches while Michael helped Tom check the property perimeter. Thank you for this, Michael said. I know you don't have any reason to trust me. You're doing the right thing now. That's what matters. I should have done it years ago. Maybe if I had, other people wouldn't have gotten hurt. Tom thought of all the choices he'd made in his own life, the paths not taken, the words left unspoken. We can't change the past. We can only try to make the present better. They returned to the house as night fell. Doc called with news. Agent Sarah Chen was en route from Great Falls with a team. ETA 3 hours. She'd make the official witness protection arrangements and begin building a federal case. Tom felt something loosen in his chest. They were going to make it. The evidence would reach the right hands, Torres would testify, and justice would finally come for the men who'd killed Jacob Whitmore. But at 10:30, headlights appeared on the access road. Not one vehicle, 5. Tom's phone rang. Vincent Rourke's voice was calm, almost pleasant. Tom Brennan, we need to talk. I'm outside your property with some friends. You have something that belongs to me. A horse and a man who's made some very poor decisions. Send them both out, and everyone else walks away unharmed. Tom looked at the Torres family huddled in his living room, at Rebecca standing with her hand on her revolver, at the peaceful ranch that had been his home for 40 years. He touched Sarah's ring at his neck, felt its weight, and made his choice. No, he said. You want them, you'll have to come through me. Rourke's laugh was cold. I was hoping you'd say that. The line went dead. Outside, the vehicles formed a semicircle, their headlights blazing, pinning the ranch house in harsh white light. The siege had begun. Tom killed the lights inside the house, plunging everything into darkness except for the harsh glare of headlights outside. His military training kicked in, assessing the tactical situation with the cold clarity that came from years of logistics work, understanding how resources moved, how pressure points developed, how systems could be defended or broken. Everyone away from the windows, he said quietly. Elena, take the kids to the bathroom. It's interior, no windows. Lock the door and stay on the floor. Elena gathered her children, fear stark on her face, but she moved quickly. Michael started to follow, but Tom stopped him. I need you here. You know Rourke's people. You know how they operate. Michael nodded, his face pale but determined. Rebecca checked her revolver, positioned herself behind the heavy oak bookshelf Tom had built with Sarah 3 decades ago. How many men does he usually travel with? Tom asked Michael. 4 or 5. Most are ranch hands, not fighters. But he keeps 2 men on payroll who are different. Ex-military, maybe ex-law enforcement. They handle the problems that require force, the professionals. Tom peered through a gap in the curtains. He could make out shapes behind the headlights, at least 8 men. Rourke had brought everyone. How long until Agent Chen arrives? Rebecca checked her phone 2 hours, maybe less if Doc told her to hurry. We hold out for 2 hours then. Tom moved through the house, checking sight lines and defensive positions. The ranch house was old but solid, built when construction meant thick walls and sturdy materials. The windows were the weak point, but most were small, the kind that would make entry difficult. A voice boomed from outside, amplified through a megaphone. Rourke. Tom, you're a reasonable man. You served your country. You understand tactics. There's 8 of us and 3 of you. The math doesn't work in your favor. Send out Torres and we'll leave. No one needs to get hurt. Tom didn't respond. Engaging in dialogue would only give Rourke information and control. Better to wait, to force him to make the first move. 5 minutes passed in tense silence. Then came the sound of breaking glass from the back of the house. Tom spun, but Rebecca was already moving. She fired twice toward the window, deliberate warning shots. Someone outside yelped in surprise. They're testing our response, Tom said. Seeing if we're armed, if we'll actually shoot. Now they know. Michael's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, his face hardening. It's Rourke. He says if I don't come out in 5 minutes, he'll burn the house down with everyone inside. He's bluffing. Fire will bring attention, other ranchers, maybe the fire department. He wants this quiet. You don't know him like I do. When Rourke's cornered, he gets vicious. Tom thought about it, running scenarios. Rourke needed Torres dead and the evidence destroyed. Burning the house would accomplish both, and he could claim it was an accident, that he was just here trying to talk sense into an employee who'd gone rogue. We need to change the dynamic, Tom said. Give him something to react to instead of calling the shots. Like what? Tom moved to the study, opened the desk drawer where he kept emergency supplies. Flares, left over from winter driving preparations. He grabbed 3, returned to the living room. We light up the area behind their vehicles. Make them worried about their own exposure instead of focusing on us. Maybe create enough chaos that some of them decide this isn't worth it. It was a long shot, but Tom had built a career on making the most of limited resources. Rebecca nodded, understanding. Michael looked skeptical but didn't argue. Tom moved to the side window with a clear angle to the right flank. He struck the first flare, counted to 3, and hurled it in a high arc. It landed behind one of the trucks, blazing red and throwing wild shadows. Shouts outside. Men moving, confused. Tom lit the second flare, threw it to the left. More chaos. Then the third straight back. Now the area behind Rourke's vehicles was lit up, their silhouettes exposed. Now we wait, Tom said. Let them worry about what else we might have. The stalemate stretched. Tom checked his watch. 90 minutes until Chen arrived. They could make it if Rourke didn't escalate. But Rourke was done waiting. The first gunshot shattered the front window, punching through the glass and burying itself in the far wall. Then another and another. Not random fire, but aimed, deliberate, trying to force them into cover. Stay down. Tom crawled to a different position, fired twice through the broken window. Not trying to hit anyone, just suppressing, making them cautious. Rebecca did the same from her position. Michael had retrieved a hunting rifle from Tom's gun cabinet, was covering the back approach. Movement in the barn. Tom's stomach dropped. Paladin was in the barn. They're going after the horse, Rebecca said. They'll kill him to destroy evidence. Tom made a split-second decision. Michael, hold the house. Rebecca, stay with the family. I'm going to the barn. That's suicide, Michael protested. That horse is the whole reason we're here. I won't let him die now. Before anyone could stop him, Tom was moving. He killed the back porch light, slipped out into darkness. The flares were dying, but they still provided enough illumination to navigate by. He moved in a crouch, using cover, his Colt ready. The barn was 50 yards away. Tom covered the distance in quick sprints, pausing behind his truck, then the woodpile, then the tractor. Gunfire continued at the house, keeping Rebecca and Michael pinned. Tom reached the barn door. It stood open, and inside he heard Paladin's frightened neighing. Someone was already inside. He entered low and fast, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. Paladin's stall was in the back. A figure stood in front of it, raising a pistol. "Don't," Tom said. The man spun. Tom recognized him, one of Rourke's professionals, the hard-faced driver who'd followed them from the Mercer property. His gun came around fast, too fast. Tom fired first. The shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him. His weapon clattered to the barn floor. Tom kicked it away, kept his Colt trained on the wounded man. "How many more in here?" The man just glared, clutching his shoulder. Tom heard movement in the loft above. He rolled aside as a second man dropped down, landing heavy. This one was bigger, quicker. He had his gun out, was swinging toward Tom. Paladin's hooves lashed out through the stall bars, catching the man in the ribs. The attacker stumbled, and Tom used the moment to close distance. A brief, brutal struggle. Tom was older, but he'd stayed in shape, and he'd been trained by instructors who taught survival, not sport. He got the man's gun hand twisted back, heard bone crack, and the weapon fell free. A blow to the temple with Tom's Colt butt, and the second man dropped. Tom's hands were shaking now, adrenaline burning through him. He moved to Paladin's stall. The horse was wild-eyed, terrified but unharmed. "Easy, easy, I've got you." He heard sirens in the distance. Not 2 hours, Doc must have pushed Chen to move faster. But the men outside heard it too, and their response was immediate. Vincent Rourke appeared in the barn doorway, backlit by the dying flares. He held a rifle, aimed at Tom's chest. He was alone. The others must have scattered when they heard the sirens. "You've cost me everything," Rourke said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were wild. 20 years of work, millions of dollars. All gone because you couldn't mind your own business. You murdered Jacob Whitmore. Jacob was a fool who didn't understand how the world works. Some men build empires, other men get in the way. Rourke's finger tightened on the trigger. "You should have stayed in the way." Tom raised his Colt, but he knew he was too slow. Rourke would fire first, and at this range he wouldn't miss. The shot echoed through the barn. Tom waited for pain, for darkness. Instead, he saw Rourke's expression change from triumph to shock. The rifle fell from his hands. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then collapsed. Behind him, Ray Clayton stood with his service weapon drawn, his face gray. "I'm sorry," Ray said, "for all of it. But I couldn't let him kill you too." The sirens were loud now, multiple vehicles racing up the drive. Flashing lights painted everything in alternating red and blue. Federal agents poured onto the property, shouting commands, securing the scene. Agent Sarah Chen was a small woman with iron in her voice. She took control immediately, directing her team, calling for medical support, processing the scene with professional efficiency. She found Tom sitting in the barn, his back against Paladin's stall, Sarah's ring clutched in his hand. "Mr. Brennan? I'm Agent Chen. Are you injured?" "No, just tired. Doc Harris briefed me. He said you'd have evidence of a major criminal operation." Tom pointed to the house. "Michael Torres is inside. He'll tell you everything. And there are files, recordings, financial records, everything you need." Chen nodded, dispatched agents to secure the witnesses and evidence. She stayed with Tom, her presence surprisingly calming. "What you did tonight was brave and incredibly reckless. Couldn't let them get away with it. Not again. They won't. Based on what Doc told me, we'll bring federal charges against everyone involved. Racketeering, theft, fraud, murder. Vincent Rourke won't see daylight again, assuming he survives his injuries." Tom looked at Ray Clayton, sitting in the back of a patrol car now, cuffed, staring at nothing. "What about him?" "Sheriff Clayton saved your life. That'll count for something. But he's still facing charges for his role in the conspiracy. The courts will sort it out." The night blurred after that. Paramedics checked everyone for injuries. Evidence technicians photographed the scene. Rebecca emerged from the house with the Torres family, all of them shaken but safe. The children were crying, exhausted and frightened. Elena held them close, whispering comfort. Michael approached Tom, tears on his face. "Thank you. For protecting them. For giving me a chance to do the right thing." "You saved yourself," Tom said. "I just helped you get there." Dawn was breaking when the federal agents finally finished their initial processing. Agent Chen told Tom and Rebecca they'd need to give formal statements later, but for now, they were free to go. Rebecca stood beside Tom, looking at Paladin in his stall. The horse had calmed now, seemed to sense the danger had passed. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." "Your father did it," Tom replied. 20 years ago. We just finished what he started." They found something else in the barn during the evidence collection, a leather saddlebag hidden in the loft, containing the tools used to alter horse identities. brand irons, surgical implements, and at the bottom, a branding iron with a circle W design. Jacob Whitmore's iron, stolen the night he died, used for 20 years to destroy the identities of stolen horses. Now would be evidence, proof of everything he'd tried to expose. Tom held the iron, felt its weight, and thought about justice delayed but finally delivered. 3 months later, Tom stood at the fence line watching Paladin graze in the autumn pasture. The horse had filled out, his coat gleaming white in the afternoon sun, moving with the grace and power of his breeding. The physical wounds had healed. The deeper ones would take longer, but time and patient care worked miracles. Rebecca walked up beside him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She'd returned to Ironwood Valley permanently, had purchased back her father's ranch using proceeds from the book deal she'd signed. A major publisher wanted to tell Jacob Whitmore's story, and Rebecca had agreed on the condition that portions of the proceeds would fund horse rescue operations. "Agent Chen called," Rebecca said. "The trial date is set, March 15th, Jacob's birthday. I know, feels appropriate somehow." She sipped her coffee, gazed out at the valley. Rourke's pleading not guilty, but with Michael's testimony and all the evidence, Chen says conviction is certain. Tom nodded. Vincent Rourke had survived his gunshot wound and was being held in federal custody. Along with him, Mayor Hutchins, Prosecutor Chen, and 6 others faced charges. The conspiracy had been larger than Tom had imagined, tentacles reaching into county government, law enforcement, even the state veterinary board. Sheriff Ray Clayton had pled guilty to lesser charges in exchange for his testimony. He'd serve 8 years, eligible for parole after 5. His last act as sheriff had been to save Tom's life, and the court had taken that into account. Tom visited him once at the county jail before Ray was transferred to federal prison. They didn't speak about the past. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said. The town was healing, slowly. Maria's Diner had become unofficial headquarters for the community as people processed what had happened. Some folks were angry, feeling betrayed by leaders they'd trusted. Others were relieved that the truth had finally emerged. Most were simply trying to move forward. Doc Harris had been instrumental in connecting federal investigators with other victims across 3 states. The scope of Rourke's operation had stunned everyone. Over 200 horses stolen, millions in fraudulent transactions, dozens of lives destroyed. Tom's ranch had become a gathering place. Rebecca visited almost daily, working with Paladin, helping Tom with the small herd of rescue horses they'd started taking in. The old barn was full again, full of animals being given second chances, finding their way back from abuse and neglect. On quiet evenings, Tom sat on his porch and talked to Sarah. Not prayers exactly, just conversations, telling her about the day, the work, the slow process of rebuilding trust in a community that had been rotted from within. "I think you'd be proud," he said to the empty air, "of what we did, of what we're trying to do now." He touched the ring at his neck, felt peace settle around him like an old coat. The loneliness hadn't disappeared, it probably never would, but it had transformed into something more bearable. Purpose had a way of filling the spaces that grief hollowed out. Rebecca emerged from the barn carrying a wooden sign she'd been crafting for weeks. She'd burned the letters deep into oak, sealed it with varnish that would withstand Montana weather. She hung it on Paladin's stall and stepped back. The sign read, "Paladin, home at last." The horse lifted his head as if he understood, as if after 20 years of being lost, he finally recognized where he belonged. Tom stood beside Rebecca, both of them watching Paladin in the golden afternoon light. 2 people who'd found purpose in seeking justice, who'd risked everything to honor the memory of a good man, who'd proven that some wrongs could still be made right if someone cared enough to try. "Dad would have liked you," Rebecca said quietly. "I think I would have liked him too." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the valley settle into evening. Somewhere in the mountains, the first snow of the season was falling. Winter was coming, but Tom's house was warm, his barn was full, and his heart, so long frozen by grief, was beginning to thaw. He'd saved a horse and found a purpose. In doing so, he'd saved himself. The story that began with death and darkness ended with life and light. Not a perfect ending, not a fairy tale, but something better, the kind of hard-won peace that came from doing what was right even when it was difficult, even when it cost everything. Tom Brennan went inside as night fell, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring, knowing that Sarah would have approved of the man he'd become in her absence, and that Jacob Whitmore's memory had finally received the justice it deserved.